Hi everyone, it's Ruby G.
And I'm Joff.
Welcome to Truth and Neurons.
In today's deep dive, we're going to examine one of the most psychologically revealing aspects of the Idaho murders investigation: patterns of distancing language and behaviour exhibited by individuals connected to the victim. We're going to look at how verbal and behavioural distancing can serve as critical psychological indicators in criminal investigations, and why certain individuals connected to this case exhibit patterns that warrant serious scrutiny.
Distancing in psychology refers to the conscious or unconscious mechanisms people employ to minimize their perceived connection to traumatic events, victims, or criminal activities. This psychological phenomenon manifests through specific language patterns, behavioral choices, and emotional presentations that create psychological and sometimes physical separation from the subject matter. Distancing serves multiple psychological functions. It can be a trauma response, a self-protective mechanism, or critically an indicator of guilty knowledge or involvement.
The psychological literature distinguishes between adaptive distancing, which helps individuals cope with trauma they've witnessed, and strategic distancing, which serves to minimize perceived culpability or connection to criminal activity. Our task is to identify which type of distancing we're observing and what it reveals about an individual's actual knowledge, involvement, or psychological state regarding the crime. In this case, we see remarkably consistent patterns of distancing behaviour across multiple individuals who are connected to the victims and the crime scene. These patterns include misnaming victims, downplaying relationships, providing vague or evasive responses, using passive language constructions, and demonstrating notable emotional detachment. When these behaviours cluster together in multiple individuals within the same social network, it raises significant questions about coordination, guilty knowledge, or shared involvement in events surrounding the crime.
One of the most psychologically revealing examples of distancing behaviour comes from Hunter Johnson's body cam interview, where he refers to victim Kaylee Gonsalves as Kylie.
Friends with Zena for a long time. Maddie, I could be acquaintances with. I didn't really know her that well. I just saw her at her house every once in a while. I would say hi and have conversations with her.
Okay.
But I didn't really know her super well. I knew Ethan and Xana.
Right.
And then Kylie, I didn't know really at all.
Okay.
From a linguistic perspective, misnaming is rarely random or meaningless. The human brain processes names with particular care when we have genuine emotional connections to individuals, and errors in naming often reflect psychological distance or lack of actual relationship depth. The psychological significance of calling Kaylee Kylie extends beyond a simple mistake. Those with genuine close relationships typically use the exact names or familiar nicknames consistently, while those with more distant or fabricated connections often make naming errors that reveal the superficial nature of their actual relationship. Hunter Johnson's misnaming could indicate several psychological realities. First, it may suggest that he didn't actually know Kaylee well enough to have internalized her correct name, despite being present at the scene and involved in the discovery process. Second, it could represent unconscious psychological distancing from the victim's identity, a defense mechanism that helps him avoid emotional confrontation with the reality of her death. Thirdly, and most concerning, it could indicate distancing designed to minimize his perceived connection to the victims he may have a greater involvement with than officially acknowledged.
Jack Showalter's interview provides one of the clearest examples of strategic distancing that contradicts documented evidence. Showalter claimed he did not know the victims other than Madison Mogan, with whom he acknowledged some shared experiences. However, photographic evidence shows Showalter at multiple parties with the victims, directly contradicting his statement of limited connection. From a psychological perspective, this type of discrepancy between documented evidence and verbal statements represents a critical red flag. When individuals deliberately minimize documented relationships, it suggests psychological motivation to reduce perceived association with victims. The behavior pattern is particularly common in suspects or individuals with guilty knowledge who understand that established connections create investigative focus and potential motive attribution.
The psychology of relationship minimization serves strategic purposes. By claiming to know only Madison, Showalter attempts to narrow the scope of his potential involvement or knowledge to a single victim rather than a broader group. This creates a psychological narrative where his presence in the social circle appears coincidental rather than integral. It also potentially limits the range of questions investigators might ask about his knowledge of the victim's routines, relationships, and activities.
The psychological implications become more significant when we consider that party attendance creates social network connections and knowledge of victim routines, living situations, and social patterns. By minimising these connections, Showalter potentially obscures his actual level of knowledge about the victim's habits and vulnerabilities. This type of strategic information management is psychologically consistent with individuals who possess guilty knowledge they're attempting to conceal while maintaining superficial cooperation with investigators. Then there's the case of Jack DeCur, Kaylee's ex-boyfriend. He presents another psychologically significant distancing pattern, claimed inability to remember a 17-minute phone call with the victim. Memory claims require careful analysis because they can represent genuine trauma-based amnesia, strategic denial, or evidence of guilty knowledge requiring concealment. A 17-minute phone conversation is significant in duration. Brief calls might plausibly be forgotten in context of routine daily communications, but extended conversations typically create stronger memory traces, particularly when they occur close to traumatic events. The literature on memory formation shows that emotionally significant conversations, especially final communications with individuals who subsequently die, typically become highly salient memories rather than forgotten interactions.
Jack DeCur's inability to recall this conversation raises several psychological questions. First, what was discussed during those 17 minutes that might create motivation for memory denial? Content of this conversation could reveal victim's state of mind, threats that she was aware of, plans she had made, or information about other individuals that might be relevant. Strategic forgetting of this content suggests potential guilty knowledge or desire to protect information that might implicate himself or others. Secondly, the psychological state required to genuinely forget such a conversation would typically involve severe trauma, substance impairment, or dissociative responses. If DeCur was in such a psychological state during the call, this itself becomes significant. Alternatively, if he was cognitively normal during the call, the claimed memory loss suggests deliberate information management rather than genuine amnesia.
Call relative to the murders also creates psychological significance. Final communication with victims often contain crucial information about their plans, emotional states, and awareness of potential threats. DeCur's memory claim effectively removes this potentially critical evidence from the investigative record, which could serve strategic purposes if the conversation's content would create investigative focus on him or others in this social network. And throughout individuals connected to the Idaho murders, we see consistent patterns of vague and evasive responses that psychologically minimize specific knowledge while maintaining superficial cooperation. These patterns include uncertainty markers, passive construction, and deflection to rumours or hearsay rather than personal knowledge. Uncertainty markers. That creates maximum distance from definitive knowledge. This linguistic pattern suggests the speaker possesses more certain knowledge but is strategically presenting it as speculation to avoid appearing too informed about victim movements and activities.
Individuals with genuine lack of knowledge typically state simply, "I don't know," rather than constructing elaborate speculative frameworks. The provision of psychologically distance from that knowledge. This pattern is common in individuals who need to explain how they know certain information without admitting direct involvement or guilty knowledge. The psychological function of vague responses extends beyond individual self-protection. In cases involving multiple perpetrators or coordinated criminal activity, vague responses can serve to avoid providing information that might contradict other witnesses' statements or reveal coordination. By maintaining ambiguity, individuals preserve flexibility to adjust their accounts based on what other witnesses report, a strategic psychological approach that suggests awareness of the need for narrative consistency among multiple parties.
A particularly revealing distancing pattern involves individuals framing knowledge through rumours and hearsay rather than claiming direct observation or information. Examples include statements like the rumours of Gonsalves having a stalker, rather than claiming personal awareness of stalking behaviour or expressing direct concern for the victim's safety. The function of rumour-based framing creates layers of distance between the speaker and the information. By attributing knowledge to unspecified others, the individual avoids appearing too informed while still introducing information into the investigative record. This serves several psychological purposes. It allows introduction of potentially exculpatory information without personal commitment. It creates the appearance of limited knowledge while actually demonstrating detailed awareness, and establishes plausible deniability if the information proves significant. The presentation of stalking concerns as community gossip rather than personal worry suggests either a lack of genuine concern for the victim or strategic distancing from information the speaker actually knows more directly.
The statement, "he had no idea who could have committed these homicides," usually the craziest thing that happens are people getting MIPs and DUIs, demonstrates psychological minimization of both the crime severity and the speaker's knowledge. By framing the murders as completely outside the normal range of local events, the speaker creates distance from any suggestion that the crime might fit within known social dynamics, conflicts, or criminal activities. This normalization attempt psychologically positions the speaker as naive about serious criminal activity, contradicting evidence of drug presence and use within the social network.
Throughout the interviews, we observe patterns of emotional detachment or inappropriate affect that psychologically distances the individuals from the expected emotional responses to traumatic loss of their peers. Descriptions of feeling jumpy or finding the area a little nerve-wracking represent remarkably muted emotional responses to the brutal murders of friends and acquaintances occurring in immediate physical proximity. Genuine trauma responses show individuals who discover or learn about violent deaths of known persons would typically exhibit intense emotional reactions, including shock, grief, horror, disbelief, and anxiety. The psychological presentation of mild nervousness or general unease, rather than profound distress, suggests either a lack of genuine relationship with victims, prior knowledge that reduces surprise and horror of discovery, or a psychological detachment consistent with involvement or guilty knowledge.
The statement that the only reason someone might have acted out like this is for love represents psychological simplification and romanticization of extreme violence by reducing complex criminal motivation to simple romantic passion. The speaker avoids engagement with more sinister possibilities, including drug-related violence, organized criminal activity, or premeditated attacks. This psychological framing normalizes a violence as crime of passion rather than calculated criminal action, potentially protecting more complex criminal networks or motivations from investigative scrutiny.
While leaving a location where violent crime has occurred might seem psychologically normal, the timing, manner, and stated reasons for departure provide insights into a psychological state and potential guilty knowledge. One interviewee describes feeling jumpy and decided to pack up and leave Moscow the day after the crime. From a trauma psychology perspective, this could represent genuine fear response. However, we must also consider whether rapid departure serves functions beyond fear response, including physical removal from investigative scrutiny, reduction of risk that continued local presence might expose guilty knowledge, or coordination with others who are similarly creating physical distance from the crime scene. While some distancing might represent genuine trauma response, consistency of patterns across multiple individuals, contradiction with documented evidence, and the strategic nature of many distancing behaviours suggest conscious efforts to minimise connections and knowledge regarding these crimes. Distancing behaviours we observe in this case, from Hunter Johnson's misnaming to Jack Showalter's relationship minimisation to Jack DeCur's memory claims, create a psychological profile of individuals strategically managing their apparent connection to victims and knowledge of events surrounding these murders. The principle remains constant. What people choose not to say, how they frame their knowledge, and what relationships they minimise often reveals more truth than what they explicitly acknowledge.
That's all for today's episode of Truth and Neurons. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the ethics of media commentary in high-profile cases. Until next time, keep thinking critically and questioning everything. Cheers, bye.